the pink sheep novels, pink sheep meaning sort of like the gay black sheep, the guys that didn't fit in.
Hello and welcome to the Queer Vision podcast. I am Becca, and today I am sitting down with Troy Ford. Troy Ford is an author and a fantastic conversationalist. So I got to learn a lot about his books, about his writing, about his newsletters. You should go follow him on Substack. You should go read his books. Honestly, you should just email him and get to know him. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. We'll just go ahead and start with you introducing yourself. Tell us a little bit about you, your name, your pronouns.
Okay, my name is Troy Ford, and my pronouns are he, him.
Perfect. And
Yeah.
what do you do?
I am a writer, an author, a newsletter publisher, and a house husband, and a dog daddy. And we live in Sitges, Spain, which is a little beach town about half an hour down the coast from Barcelona. It's a well-known gay Mecca on the Gold Coast, Costa Dorada, and so we have all sorts of festivals all year long, Pride and Carnival, and God, there's everything you can think of, from basically Carnival in February until the world famous horror film festival that we host here in town at the in October every year. So it's a very busy, bustling little beach town, tourist town, and also, sort of a lot of queers come here to retire. And although I'm not retired and my husband Leo is not retired, we know a lot of people who are.
Right. So, okay, I have so many questions now. I want to start with what all you write about and tell us a little bit about that. But I am very interested in how you ended up where you are right now, because if I'm not mistaken, you have like an American accent. So
Yeah.
you're not originally from there. So,
No.
but anyway, first off, what all is you writing about? Tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, so I have two books actually that I have. Well, I should say I have one book published last year. My debut novel is called Lamb, and it's the story of two young gay boys who meet at boarding school when they're just 15 years old or so, and it continues on through their teens and their 20s until one of them, the titular main character Lamb, disappears just as they are about to move in together in San Francisco. And so the story is a reflection, basically told in journal entries and letters that they exchanged and conversations that they had. And, there's short stories that Lamb wrote because he was an aspiring writer. And so it follows the course of their relationship, through their youth until this strange occurrence happens. And so it's all sort of told in reflection into the past, as the narrator, who just goes by the initial D, is reflecting on Lamb and his relationship and what happened. So that was last year. And then this year, I'm actually publishing, coming July 14th. It will be released, and it's called Water Spout. And it's actually the first book that I wrote in 2020. Actually, I started during lockdown, and I wrote Water Spout first, but I'm publishing it second. So Water Spout is the story of another young both books are kind of coming of age stories. And Water Spout is the story of Jimmy, who is a party bottom. He's a twink, and he's got a little bit of a drinking problem. And so but he's also an aspiring painter. And so it follows his life from the point at which he kind of loses everything. He loses his boyfriend. He loses his apartment in San Francisco. He ends up moving across the San Francisco Bay, to a little town called Albany, and meets by chance this guy from New York who's kind of plugged in, has got a lot of contacts and so forth, who promises him introductions in New York for his painting career. And so as he's getting his feet and trying to put together a new body of work for this, this new possibility that this guy has introduced him to, he gets embroiled with a number of different characters, including a daddy boy couple in his building, and also a non-binary coworker of his. And so the story basically continues on through basically, their meeting, and then the rather explosive conclusion to all of the relationships that he kind of has put together as he's trying to become, a famous painter, basically. So that's Water Spout, coming July 14th. So here is the cover of Water Spout by Troy Ford, and that's coming July 14th. And right here it says, as you might be able to see, a pink sheep novel. I don't know if that's clear enough.
Yeah.
Because I'm calling both of these books basically a loose constellation of related, stories thematically. Although there is actually going to be 2 follow-up books to Lamb. The first one is mostly written, and that's going to follow the narrator D from Lamb 20 years later and look at his life, because he's kind of, although he's one of the main characters in Lamb, he's kind of, the focus isn't so much on him. He's the narrator. So the second book that I'm hoping to release next year would be Dee's story of what his life is like 20 years later, around the time that he starts narrating the story of Lamb and going through all the old journals and papers and stuff that he still has from his friend. And then the third book would actually be an account of Lamb, the main character, after he disappeared in the year 2000 and what happens to him. And so I'm really excited to start writing that one. But that would probably be released in, if I can do it, if I can do like 4 novels in 4 years, that would be like 2028. So we'll see. Fingers crossed.
Okay. What genre? Because I'm hearing this premise, and I'm like, this could either be a drama or a horror or somewhere in the middle or something completely different. What genre are you in?
It's funny that you say that, because I wrote a post. So I also write, besides my books, I write 2 newsletters. And so one is called Ford Knows Books, and the other is called Qstack. And I can tell you more about but in particular in Ford Knows Books, I wrote a post recently, and I was basically calling it low queer horror. And what I meant by that was that it's not like it's the everyday horror of queer people's lives, basically, and how they have to face, all sorts of horrible situations all the time, and how they deal with that. You know what I mean? And so it's not horror. I'm joking. It was very tongue in cheek that I was calling it low queer horror, but I consider it literary fiction. But it's also queer fiction, it's because it's, like when you look at the covers of my books, you can see Lamb right behind me. The covers of my books don't have, like these AI generated hunks with, 6-packs and that kind of stuff. I'm just not interested. God. Yeah. Well, thanks. I'm just not interested in writing or, depicting that kind of stuff. Although there's a little bit of sex in both books, and there will probably always be, because as one reviewer wrote, this is life, this is real life, you know what I mean?
Right.
Sex is part of life, so there's a little bit of that, but I'm just not really interested in the sort of the romance, erotica, or just spicy romance kind of stuff. You know what I mean? It's fun to read, but I'm not interested in writing that. So literary fiction, queer fiction, that kind of covers it.
Okay. I love that. Okay. You have written now 2 books. You are planning on 2 more. And you're saying, whenever you say it's a constellation, so what I'm hearing is it's basically you have one series set, and then the other one will be connected, but not in the same series.
Well, because I'm saying that the whole thing, the pink sheep novels, pink sheep meaning sort of like the gay black sheep, the guys that didn't fit in, the guys that, and didn't necessarily, like in both cases, all the main characters, they don't just slide right into queer culture so very easily. You know what I mean? They kind of stand apart. They don't necessarily feel included even in gay circles necessarily, even though they're there, but they don't necessarily feel, included in it necessarily. And so that's the pink sheep. And then the hope is that, although Lamb and then the 2 follow-up books to Lamb, as well as Water Spout, and then other books, other standalone books like Water Spout would then become, and they might have some intersecting characters, but it's a lot of it is like thematically,
Okay.
is the structure to that series. So
Okay. Have like similar vibes a little
yes.
bit. Like you'll be like, oh yes, this feels like that other book kind of, but it won't be like I have to have read that other book to understand this one.
I mean, in that sense, I think they'll all probably be kind of standalones. You know what I mean? Like it's not
Okay.
going to be, like like whether it was science fiction or fantasy or whatever, it's like, it's not a single story that's told in 3 parts or however many, you know what I mean?
Okay.
It's standalone stories, some similar characters, but you can read each one, you can read each
Yeah.
one by itself and get the gist of it.
I love that. That makes it so easy because sometimes I feel like whenever I'm reading a series, the first one I don't love, the second one I do, and I'm like, but I can't go back and just reread the second one because like you need to remember the stuff that's from the first one. You know what I mean? So this is really cool. I like that way of writing. It makes it refreshing as a reader. But you mentioned your other writing stuff. You mentioned Qstacks and you mentioned Ford Knows.
Ford Knows
So
books. Yeah.
yeah. Can you please tell us a little bit about those?
So I will tell you about Ford Knows books first, which was in fact
Okay.
actually originally titled, the newsletter was called Ford Knows actually. But then I realized that as I was going along,
Oh,
I was just writing about books all the time. So I just decided, to make
okay.
it about books clearly in the title. And so that one is kind of a little bit more personal. So there's some short
Okay.
stories in there that I've written. There's a lot of essays, personal essays that I've written, as well as other stuff. That's kind of like, I consider that one sort of my personal newsletter,
Okay.
where people who, maybe have read my books or, people who haven't read my books, but, maybe, are just curious and, are interested in like my voice and, like my style or whatever. There's a lot of humor in it.
Mhm.
And so that's where I kind of just write my own stuff. And I do a series. I do a couple of series on that one. I do the Books We Love Club. And so every month I have a guest writer they sit at their own computer somewhere,
Right.
mostly in America, some in England, I suppose. And they do guest reviews of books that they love, that they go back to again and again. So rather than, the latest beach read or the latest bestseller or, the book that everybody's talking about, this gives people an opportunity to go back to the book that they just absolutely love and have recommended again and again. So that's a lot of fun. We've had some really good entries in that one and a lot of kind of like classics and stuff like that,
Mhm.
or sometimes classics, which maybe not as many people have heard of, like Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Were Watching God. And recently I had a guest writer, Michael Steele, and he wrote about Love in the Time of Cholera. And it's by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And it was interesting. His particular entry was interesting. And all of them are interesting because they always give, it's like, it's an opportunity for them to say why it touched them so much, And in Michael's situation, for example, it really moved him when he read it as a teenager because he was in love with a girl. And he just really sort of identified with the main character of Love in the Time of Cholera, whatever his name was, I can't remember. He reread it in order to write the review like 20 years later. So now he's not 17 years old. He's like 40. And he was like, hold the phone. This is not the book that I thought it was. And in fact, the main
Yeah.
character is rather creepy, And so it was really fun. And I had another author actually who's got a wonderful book out right now as well, named Eleanor Anstruther. And her book is called Fallout. And it's about the Greenham women's protest camp in the 80s that lasted for like 15 or 20 years. They just camped out at this nuclear site in the UK. So she wrote, I don't know, last year or the year before when I first started it, she wrote Why I Hate James Joyce's Ulysses. And I absolutely loved it because it was just like, it was just feminist, this absolute screed against, James Joyce and what a jerk he was, basically. So it's been a lot of fun hosting that every month with different writers. And then I also do a monthly series called The Road to Published. And that's been kind of like a monthly explanation of all the different, aspects that go into self-publishing a book.
Oh.
And so, one month I might write about, a conference, a writing conference I went to. Like last summer, I went to the Conference in Matera, Italy, actually. And it was a lot of fun. It was like this super, super small conference, but I learned so much from all the people that I met there. And, and then the next month it might be about, feedback. I did actually a 2-part series, a 2-parter actually about, like all the different kind of feedback that I got on my first book on Lamb, and how some of it was wonderful and great, and some of it was not so wonderful and great, you know what I mean? And some of it was just baffling. And, I was kind of trying to point out how, how personal and how, subjective feedback can be, and and have it kind of sometimes take a little step back from it, you know what I mean? Like a lot of people are like, never read your reviews, you know what I mean? And I found I can't resist reading my reviews, and I've been lucky. I've gotten some really good, I've gotten some really wonderful reviews. I've gotten some negative comments, but overall, like on Goodreads and Amazon, Lamb is 4-star plus rating. And, so overall it's been really positive. And I guess I am waiting at some point for someone to just go crazy and hate my books, which might well happen with Water Spout because of some of the content in it.
Honestly, that's actually a really good point. Because I feel like that's how it is with anything that you do, right? Anything you put in the public eye, like you're like, yes, this is how I felt while writing it. This is how I felt while putting it together. This is what I meant for people to feel. And then you realize you can't, like, you can do your damnedest to make sure that people feel that way, right? You can be like, hey, I'm leading this. But at the same time, whenever people read it, they're reading it with their own experiences and with their own history and their own internalized everything, right? And so like when they read it, it becomes their book, or their story or whatever it is, right? And so like you can't get upset with them for it because obviously like that's not the point of writing, right?
It was their experience. Yeah, it was their experience of it.
It's their experience, but at the same time, it can be so hard to reconcile with that. I feel like I'm with you though. I have to read like if somebody leaves a comment on anything that we post online or anything like that, I'm just like, I'm here.
Yeah.
I'm here immediately because I'm like, I want to know what you thought, even if it's
1
bad.
minute ago.
Immediately. This is me looming over the comment section, And so like I get it, but it's so hard, I feel. And I think people that don't like have things that they've created and then given to the public, I feel like people don't see how vulnerable that can be, right? Because you are truly saying, hey, this is something that I spent so long on, and this is my heart, this is my soul, this is a thing that I made to feel this way. And people could destroy you.
Well, let me tell you a story.
Tell me.
In 2020, when I started writing Lamb, or what was to become Lamb anyway, I had been suffering at that point from an over 30-year writer's block. I had wanted to be a writer since I was like 9 years old, and I read Harriet the Spy, and I loved it, and I just was just like, this is the life for me. And so I wrote all from like that point, 9 years old until I was 17 years old. And then I went to a summer school, and I took a creative writing class that was taught by a husband and wife team of teachers just for the summer, mind you. And I wrote a story that the class was science fiction fantasy. And they announced in the first class, even though I was like fantasy, you know what I mean? That was like my thing, fantasy. And they announced in the very first class, we don't really like fantasy. We prefer science fiction, but we'll tolerate your fantasy stories. And so I was like, okay. And I wrote my first fantasy story for that class, and they ripped it to shreds. And I was humiliated and absolutely just, I felt so much shame, and I felt so, just so horrible. I wrote in a journal for all that time, 3 decades, more than 3 decades from that time, but I never ever shared anything with anybody else because I was so terrified of feeling that again. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Of having someone say something like that or treating me like that again. And I was so terrified of that. I just completely shut down. And so it was, it was basically, it was two parts, actually. It was finally being locked in practically a garret in Barcelona, where we lived our first year here in Spain, and having nothing to do and absolutely nowhere to go because of lockdown for 3 months. And I forced myself to write this book, and it worked, where I had always only ever gotten, like 30 or 50 pages into my novel projects in the past. I was able to finish a book. And strangely enough, it was not fantasy. It's not fantasy. Obviously, I decided to change it up. Because all the other attempts have been fantasy, dozens of, attempts to write novels. I changed it up and I decided to write something personal, something that was, like a little blend of my real life, as a younger person, and just obviously just stuff I made up, mostly just stuff I made up. And the result was Water Spout, and I was able to get through it. And I was like, okay, well, I can do this. And then getting on Substack, starting my first newsletter, Forward Knows, writing, getting really wonderful feedback, and really, making friends with a lot of people on that platform who were also in much the same boat, had always wanted to write, but had never done it before. And, we just kind of found each other. The class of 23, was, all these people that kind of started their Substacks around the same time. And a lot of them are really good friends, so that helped me so much. And now, and here I am, 2 books later, and then have added my second newsletter, which I did actually relatively early on, Qstack. Qstack started out as a directory because there are no demographic categories on Substack. So if you're looking for, women's Substacks newsletters, or BIPOC, or, I can't even think of, all of the different curves, but obviously, and queer, you cannot say this is a queer newsletter. And it was so hard to find other queer people on the platform when I started it. I was like, well, I guess I have to do this the hard way and literally go through and search by keywords, queer and LGBTQ and IA and, 2S, AA plus plus, whatever. And I cobbled together this list of other queer creators. And I decided, screw it. I'm just going to make everybody's life easier. I'm going to make this a directory, because I had seen some other directories on Substack, and I was like, this will be, I kind of like this, data stuff, just like, just crunching. And so I did that, and it really took off, and people were really grateful and really, were really happy to not have to. I mean, you search for queer or, other, related keywords on Substack, and you're just as likely to get a anti-queer Substack as you are to get, a positive one. And plus they had, a bunch of ones that, were defunct, hadn't been posted to for forever and ever. And, it was just a mess. And it's still kind of a mess, except that there's so many now. And there's such a great network of people. And I like to think that Qstack really helped with that, putting people in touch with each other. And so now there's a feature called cross-posting on Substack, where you can take somebody else's article or essay, and you can cross-post it to your Substack and send it to your subscriber list. And the beauty of that is that now I no longer have to wait for people to submit, because a lot of people have, blocks against submitting as well. I mean, again, that, that kind of feeling of rejection that many people have,
Yeah.
So rather than waiting for submissions, which I was doing for the first 2 years, now I just go out, I find the great writing on Substack, I cross-post it, it gets sent directly to the inboxes. And when people click on it, the original writer gets the views, they get the likes, they get the comments.
That's nice.
You see what you see is a lot of times some of the ones that I've cross-posted to my subscribers end up being some of the most popular posts for some of the newer writers, especially, who don't have as big of a subscriber base as Qstack has, because it's been around for, 3 years. And So I'm really pleased with that. Just this year, we've highlighted 150 different artists, writers, creators, which is like triple the number we were able to do last year, and we've doubled the number of views to like over 250,000 views for Qstack, and by extension, the writers whose posts are getting viewed. So I'm really
Yeah.
pleased with how it's going.
Time for all this because like I feel like I don't know, like whenever you first started listening to me, I was like, yeah. Okay, writing a novel in a year, that takes a long time, but like it's okay, you could do it. And then you're like, and then I have this newsletter. And then like you mentioned Qstack. Qstack sounds like a lot. So like
There's a lot of work.
how do you have time to do any and all of this?
So, I mean, that was one of the big things that we were looking to do when we moved from Oakland. I'm a California boy. My
Okay.
husband also grew up in the Bay Area. And that was something that we were really looking for when we moved from Oakland to Spain. We were looking to kind of downshift our lives a little bit, and especially, like try and get out of the corporate thing if possible. Well, so since we moved, it's been 7 years now, I haven't worked outside of the home. And so this is kind of my full-time gig. And I would love to say that, I'm making some bags of money, but I'm not.
No.
But my husband he continues to do the same work that he did, when we lived in the Bay Area.
Mhm.
And, rather than both of us having to, to the daily grind, going to employment situations or whatever, he does his thing and I do my thing. And then I also, as much as possible, I take up the slack, take care of the house, take care of the dog, and so house husband and dog daddy.
It's amazing because like I feel like whenever we started Queerlina, I was like, oh my God, a monthly magazine is going to be so much work. And then we had a team and it was great. And then the team was also like, actually, this is a lot of work. And so I started to be in charge of it. And I was like, actually, I really enjoy this. And at first I was like, I have so much time. I can write magazine. I can write like articles. I can write like novel type stuff. And I started my novel and I was like, this is great. And then like my other job, which is organizing, picked up, which is where I make money, right? So that's my moneymaker. And so I'm like, oh, okay, well, it's fine. I still have time. And then we started adding more events and doing more things with Queerlina. And I'm like, I have not written for myself in like at least 6 months because I'm like, holy crap, I don't have time. And so I don't understand. Like, I mean, okay, you don't have events like that, but at the same time, you have everything that's monthly. Like, you have so much stuff going on. So I,
It's weekly, actually. I mean, Qstack and Fort knows,
oh,
I've
they're
pulled back
weekly.
a little bit. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Qstack publishes 3 times a week, sometimes more. And Ford Knows used to be every week, but now I've pulled back a little bit. It's like 2 to 3 times a month now. And so, but it is a lot of work, and it does take time away from my, like my fiction writing, to be honest.
Yeah.
But I'm still, as long as I continue moving forward with, with the writing for me, for, fiction, I feel like as long as it is still moving forward, even if it's a slightly slower pace, I'm okay with that.
That makes sense. That makes sense. And it feels like you are just so calm in your life right now. Like, even though you do have a lot going on, you're just like happy with it. So I think that does help with the inspiration as well.
Yeah, it does. It does. I am in a good place, actually. And I'll be honest. I got sober 4.5 years ago.
Oh,
So
congrats.
right around, thank you very much. So right around the time that I started doing all of this, and I also got a really good lesbian therapist, online, and I absolutely adored her, and she really helped me kind of get my head on straight. And so
Hmm.
I really, I can't complain. This is kind of probably the sweet spot of my entire life, to be honest. So it's a
Good.
long time coming.
Good. No, that gives me hope. I feel like and seeing the way that you and your husband work like that also gives me a lot of hope because I have enough of a disability that having like a normal everyday job is difficult. And
Yeah.
so doing the jobs where I am the one in charge and I can do my schedule is great until it also means that I have to find the people to hire me. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's up and
Right.
down, especially in this economy. So it does help me a lot because like my fiance is the one that's working the most. And I feel like seeing that it is successful for you does help me see a future that is possible.
Yeah. 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 I mean, my husband, Leo, is a saint. And, and he's been incredibly supportive,
Good.
with this endeavor. And, it's my biggest cheerleader. And, it's been in terms of carrying the load the financial load for the most part and allowing me, I mean, I work, hard at
Right.
all of
Right.
these things at writing books and the newsletters and, all sorts of things, but, it's just not compensated
It's not capitalism's idea of working.
yeah, no, it's not, but that's slowly, very slowly changing, with paid subscriptions to Qstack, especially, that is starting to turn around. I'm able, to kind of contribute a little bit, and so yeah, so I'm very fortunate, I have to say, you know what I mean? And not everybody, certainly in this economy, especially in America, doesn't have the option of, one person staying home and doing all of this kind of
Right.
thing while the other one is going to a corporate job or whatever,
Right.
So
Speaking
yeah.
of America,
Oh
since you
God.
don't live here, since you don't live here anymore, what are you seeing out there? I mean, like obviously I know you probably still have friends here that are telling you everything that's happening as they see it, but like what are you seeing that's different out there than we're seeing here, if that makes sense? Like news and media.
Not that much, if I'm being
Really?
honest,
Okay.
because I still read all of the American, websites, news sites or whatever, CNN, NBC News, blah, 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 and I actually had to change which ones I was consuming recently because I was just getting so angry about all of just the stupidest things. You know what I mean?
Stupid.
Like the atrocities are one thing, but then just the stupid little things like Kennedy Center and all of this just, ugh, it drives me insane. So I switched to Reuters, which is more of a global news service.
Okay.
And although they do report on a lot of the bigger stuff, like the stuff that intersects with the rest of the world, you don't see as much, nonsense like, UFC fights on the White House lawn, that type of thing, even though I still kind of go back and check CNN and NBC News and all that stuff. But it's like, an American tragedy. It's like, what has happened? I don't understand it. I
Yeah.
sometimes hope and feel like this is just the last gasp of, the patriarchy just clawing, nails out, just, refusing to let go. But I don't know. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it looks much the same. I'd at least have the pond in between me and the rest of it
Yeah.
to buffer it slightly.
Does what happens here affect like where you are at all? Or is it just more like, I mean, mentally, obviously, I know it would because you're seeing it happen to people that you care about and you're seeing it to happen to your home country. But like, is it affecting anything where you are or anything like that?
So much, not so much, again, from the inside, America, thinks it's, like the most important, wonderful, place in the world. From the outside, you know what I mean? People just don't really care that much, you know what I mean? Like America, and 99% of the time, and we've been in this town for a while now, and there are a lot of Americans, regardless. So, it doesn't happen as much anymore, but a lot of times when you introduce yourself and you're like, of course I always say, I'm a Californian, not an American. But when they find out that you're from the US, most people are like, oh, you poor thing, like poor you coming from that mess, that swamp of a political situation. So
Yeah.
anyway, but for the most part, actually there was this Spanish guy one time who, we talked to and we were all blah, 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 Trump. And he goes, I love Trump. And we were like, God even here? And his whole thing was, well, he really understands, the economy. You know what I mean? I'm like, are you crazy? I mean, multiple bankrupt, nonsense. But that was his thing. And that's the only thing that was important to him. And I'm just like, oh my God, don't talk to me. We didn't like him.
Jesus.
But
I mean, at least, okay, it makes me feel a little bit better that there are also dumb people out there. So,
oh,
so,
oh yeah, yeah.
so much so.
I mean, Catalonia, so within Spain, obviously there are a lot of different, what I think they call them semi-autonomous regions that also have, often have their own languages. And so Barcelona and Sitges, where we live, is part of Catalonia, and they speak Catalan. And there's a big independentista movement. Like they want to withdraw from Spain, and they want to be their own country. Many of them, not all. And so there's this constant kind of fight between, do we speak Spanish or do we speak Catalan? There's two languages here, and for the longest time, even when we first moved, I mean, I didn't know about any of this before we moved here. But when we got here, I was seeing signs, for example, thinking that they were Castellano, which is what we know as Spanish, is actually the language Castellano, which is the language of Madrid, where the capital is, and is the universal language of Spain. But Catalans, especially since during the Franco years, from like 1939 to 1970, whatever, Franco really tried to stifle Catalan, the language, as well as the culture and people. And so they weren't allowed to speak Catalan. And so from that perspective, it makes perfect sense that now that Franco's long dead, 2 generations later, they're really hoping to, sort of revive it and make sure it continues as a living language,
Yeah.
But it can be really difficult sometimes, reading signs and stuff and thinking you're reading Spanish and it's actually Catalan, and, you're mixing up Spanish and Catalan words all over the place. And, so it's a challenge. It's, there's other things, but that's one of the kind of funny things about living here.
That is really cool, though. I think it's intriguing to see that everywhere in the world has the same argument in different fonts. Like
in different fonts? Is that what you said? That's funny. I like that. Totally. Absolutely.
I do want to go back to your Ford Knows book because I'm intrigued as to why you started that in the first place. You explained why you started Qstack. What made you want to start Ford Knows book?
So that kind of like, I mean, I did a blog back in 2012-ish or something like that. And I really enjoyed it. It was tied into an Etsy store, like a vintage Etsy store that me and Leo started. And so I just started writing about, just funny things and interesting things that really either related to some of the objects that, that we collected and were selling on Etsy or whatever, but I really enjoyed it. But, back then it was a lot harder to get going on a blog. It was kind of past the initial phase of blogging. And, when it was kind of like, it was maybe easier as opposed to kind of get a little bit of a readership or whatever, but it was before. I mean, there's a lot of platforms out there. For me, Substack has worked beautifully. And in terms of like, as a social media platform, it's the one I've had, the most fun with, the most success with. And it just fits, with what I've tried to do. But the point of starting this when I did was because I was reading all about, when I was trying to get Water Spout originally published, I was going to try and go the traditional way because that's the only way I really knew. And I started doing a lot of research, of course, and doing the query letters to agents and, query tracker and all that kind of stuff. But of course, the platform was what was missing in part from my, my sort of query package, because it's not just, you're not just selling to an agent. You're not just selling the book. You're to some extent selling yourself as well. And what they're looking for is not just someone who's written a good book, but someone who's going to have perhaps a viable long-term career of, of writing books over years. And nothing was catching, you know what I mean? And so I started a newsletter on, I don't know if you remember Twitter before it was X, had a newsletter. It was called Review. And that's where I started. And then like 6 months after I started my newsletter on Review, it got shut down. Elon Musk bought Twitter, changed to X, and he fired basically the whole division. Review, the whole newsletter thing just went out the window, and they were like, back up all your posts because we're gonna, And so right around that time I was taking a class, and this woman, Amanda Monte, she does kind of like a women's focused, newsletter, very popular, mentioned she was the leader of the class, and she mentioned that she was on Substack, and she's like, you should try it. So I did, and I loved it, and I was able to finally start writing things that I wanted to write. Plus, I was getting people, and it started slow, I think I readers for the first almost not quite a year, maybe about 10 months.
Okay.
And, it took me that long to go from, like the 20 readers I had from Review to 100 readers or whatever. And I started serializing Lamb, the first one I published. And I was able to, to sort of build it up from there. And then after Ford Knows, and when I was noticing how many people, were basically straight people on, who were subscribed to Ford Knows, it's like, I got to do something to get the queer people in because that's my demographic, And originally Qstack was going to be just a section on Ford Knows books. And at the last minute, I decided to make it its own newsletter. And it has actually been, much more successful ultimately than like Ford Knows books, in terms of new subscribers and paid subscribers and so forth. But but that's how, and so I use them, sort of like, this is sort of the public, the queer, the everybody community newsletters, Qstack, and then my personal newsletter is Ford Knows books. And they're very closely, aligned in terms of the way that Substack structures it. You can, sort of nest them all under your own profile, or you could split them off, or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's worked really well for me. I know a lot of people, they don't like the whole Nazi, contingent, but I have to say, I've seen almost nothing of that. And maybe it's partly my viewing habits and it's my personal algorithm or whatever, you know what I mean? But in terms of both the Nazi contingent, which is still there, as well as the anti-queer people, there's virtually, they're not there, you know what I mean? Like, at least they're not coming for me, you know what I mean? So for the most part, and I'm, absolutely pleased and happy to use the block button.
Good. I love that. I love that.
Generously.
I love that. Have you covered, or has anybody done a review on Before the Coffee Goes Cold?
No. Is that a book that you absolutely adore? And will you please come write a review for the Books We Love Club? I would love that. I would
really?
love to
okay.
have
Yes.
You. Oh my God.
I need to reread it. Hey, wait. Let me go grab it. 1 second.
Yeah. Do.
Okay. So I am notoriously somebody like I'm a mood reader. Okay. So I have to read
a mood reader.
I'm a mood reader. I have to read like five different books at a time because
gotcha.
I need to be able to be like, oh no, this isn't it. I'm pushing through this, whatever. And so since I do organizing, I'm working with my hands a lot, but my mind is just like, so I have like audiobooks going a lot. And I don't know how I found this book, but it's a very short book. This is Before the Coffee Gets Cold. And I got the series. I don't usually buy new books, but I did. It's Before the Coffee Gets Cold.
Toshikazu Kawaguchi. Interesting.
It's pretty small. Not
when
huge
was
at
it
all.
Published?
It's a really good question. Let me look. Copyright is 2019. But there are 4 books in the series. But it's not really a series. It's like every single chapter is a different story of the same story. So the premise is that there's this shop in Japan. It's a coffee shop where you can go sit in this specific seat, have coffee poured by a specific person and start sipping it. And you'll get to go backward or forward in time based off of where you want to go. You just have to think of the time. The only caveat is, one, you you have to stay in the seat or else like you'll get brought right back to the future or the past or wherever. And 2, you have to finish the coffee before it gets cold or else you'll be stuck as a goat. And so like people are like, well, why? Once they hear the story, they're like, why would you go back and forward in time? That's silly. And the stories in here are why people chose to do it. And they are like whenever I read this, like, I mean, I've always struggled with like depression, anxiety and stuff like that. And sometimes whenever you have those, you get so stuck in your own head and not that you don't think about other people, but like you're seeing other people and you're like, well, I feel bad that anything I'm doing could ever influence you and make you feel bad, instead of you have a whole different world inside your brain. And like, I think this book opened my brain up a little bit. And like, I feel like I need to go back and do it again because, naturally you go back in on yourself, or at least I do. But whenever I read this, I just sat there. Like there were times where I had to stay in my car because I was like, if I turn my car off, it won't feel the same. Like I need to listen to the rest of this book. And I just had to sit there and just hear the rest of that story inside the story, like the chapter or whatever. And I listened to the first 2 and then I physically read the last 2. Oh my God, the emotions that came into my body. And I was like, I am not a mother. I do not plan on being a mother, but there was one in there where I was like, this is it. Like, I understand motherhood now. Like, I understand why people would want to do it. And so this is a fantastic series. I highly recommend it. And I would I'm actually going to go to a cabin next weekend. So I will reread the book. I will write a little ditty and I will send it over to you because it's fantastic.
Yeah,
it's
no,
fantastic.
please do. Yeah, I think I have, what do I have? I have someone for July and I have someone for August. So if you wanted to publish it September, I
September's my birthday month.
1,000. Oh, perfect. 1,000 to 2,000 words,
Perfect.
Give or take, and just why you love it so much, and it sounds wonderful. I also have struggled with depression, anxiety, especially anxiety, but depression too, and as well as the sobriety things and so forth and so on. And I always think of it as like, a lot of people, I don't know how it is for other people sometimes, but for me, it's often is kind of like a dissociative experience.
Yeah.
Where I am, there's so much going on. It's like a brainstorm going on. I mean, that I just like take a giant step back from in my head from experience. And so everything is kind of like muffled and through this layer. I mean, I've had, lights flashing. Have you ever heard of exploding head syndrome?
I've heard of it. I've never experienced it. Thank God.
Yeah, where you hear crashes and you hear gunshots and you hear shouts and, doors slamming and stuff like that. And they're not there. You know what I mean? And that was actually, I took for the longest time. I didn't know what was happening, or cymbals crashing. You know what I mean? And then I was just like, what is this? What is this?
What
and
is
I
this
looked
experience?
up exploding head syndrome. It's fun.
No, I feel like sometimes I will be behind my body is how I explain it. Is like my body is doing the thing and I'm just trailing along behind it and I don't know how to, like, I'm not controlling my body even though I am, but I'm not. Or like I just feel like my fingertips are numb a little bit, or like, or like you said, like there's so much going on in my head that like nothing's getting to my mouth. So like people have always seen that as me shutting down and pushing them out. And really it's just me being like, I physically can't form words because my brain isn't telling me which words to come out. And it's going to come out as a jumble, or it's going to come out as me making no sense, or me saying something that I know is actually going to upset you, even though it's not what I mean. So I'm like, I just don't talk until I can reset.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know. I feel it too.
Yeah. Well, of course, that's the note that we end on. I love that. Well, we are getting close to the hour. So is there anything left that you would like to talk about that we haven't, or that you would like to touch back on? And can you please tell us where to find you?
Yeah, I can't think of anything that I was burning to talk about, but I will give you some, some of my things. So in most social media, I go by Mr. Troy Ford Author. That's Mr. Troy Ford Author. So on Instagram, Facebook, Goodreads, Threads, Blue Sky, whatever. And Troy Ford, I think, or Troy Ford Author on Goodreads and BookBub and all of that. So, but the best two places to find me really are on Substack or my personal website. So Ford Knows Books. The website is troyford.substack.com. Qstack is qstack.com. Substack.com, and then I have a personal website, which is troyfordauthor.com. And so, you can, if you're on Substack, you can DM me. If you go to my website, there's a contact form, and I love getting people reaching out. So yeah.
Oh, wonderful. Well, thank you so very much for jumping on here and for being willing to brave the time difference.
In the afternoon here, so that's not a problem for me at all. But it's I think it's, what is it, 9:30 now there
here
for you? Yeah. So it's been my great pleasure to talk with you, Becca. And
thank you.
And by all means, I would love to see your review.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. And I'm so glad that I got to listen to your spiel about your books as well, because we're going to add them to our never ending list of queer books for Queer Lana's book club. So
thank you.
They'll get filtered in and voted on, and hopefully we'll get to read that soon with the group.
Lovely. Thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Queer Vision Podcast. Once again, I am Becca, and today I sat down with Troy Ford, and you should go support him. Go to his website, go to his Substacks, subscribe, follow him on all of the socials that you have. And honestly, if you're a reader and you like writing reviews, go reach out, because you should write a review. Why not? But anyway, thank you so much for sitting down, and thank you so much for going along with us and listening to two folks who love books talk for an hour. If you would like to follow us and to learn more about us, you can go to queerlana.org. That's QUEEROLINA.org. We have all of our information there. You can find our Queer Vision magazine. You can find all of our events. You can find a community calendar where you can add events and find other events. Yeah, there's so much to find. There's so much to explore. There's Queer Lana TV, which is very new, but it's there. We have a few videos on there. So yeah, thanks for being a part of our Queer Vision team. Have a good day.